With his weathered hands clutching the steering wheel of his old pickup truck, Jackson Reeves stared in disbelief at the twisted metal wreckage wedged between two massive pine trees on the remote mountainside. The helicopter's once sleek frame was now a mangled shadow of itself, smoke still rising from the engine compartment, despite the heavy snow that had blanketed the crash site. As a lifetime resident of these treacherous Colorado mountains, Jackson had seen his share of accidents, but nothing like this. With his heart pounding against his ribs, he approached the crumpled door, pulling it open with a metallic screech that echoed through the silent forest. The pilot's vacant eyes stared back at him. But it was the diplomatic seal and the blood-stained documents scattered across the cockpit that made Jackson's blood run cold. He had just stumbled upon something that powerful people would kill to keep secret. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The relentless winter wind howled through the ancient pines as Jackson Reeves navigated his trusty pickup truck along the narrow mountain road that snaked through his property. At 58, the lines etched into his face told the story of a lifetime spent working the land, battling the elements, and somehow managing to keep Evergreen Ridge Farm operational despite the increasing economic pressures facing small independent farmers like himself. Jackson adjusted his worn leather gloves, his fingers stiff from the biting cold that had descended upon the Colorado mountains earlier than usual this season. November had barely begun, yet Mother Nature had already dumped nearly 2 feet of snow across the higher elevations. Through the truck's windshield, the world appeared as a pristine white canvas. Beautiful, but treacherous. Jackson knew better than most how quickly the mountain's serene facade could turn deadly. "Damn early winter," he muttered to himself, carefully steering around a fallen branch partially obscured by snow. His destination was the eastern fence line, where several sections needed reinforcement before the next storm hit. According to the weather report crackling over the truck's ancient radio, another system was moving in within 48 hours, promising to drop another foot of snow on the already burdened landscape. The eastern section of Evergreen Ridge Farm bordered national forest land, with the property line running along a steep ridge that overlooked a valley below. The location provided breathtaking views, but created constant maintenance challenges, especially during winter months when the weight of snow and ice regularly damaged fencing. Jackson's thoughts drifted to his son Michael, who had left the farm 5 years ago for a corporate job in Denver. Their last conversation, a tense phone call 3 days prior, replayed in his mind. Michael had once again suggested selling the struggling farm to one of the luxury resort developers who had been circling the property like vultures, offering substantial sums for the prime mountain acreage. "Dad, you can't keep fighting this battle alone," Michael had argued. "Mountain Sky Resorts is offering enough for you to retire comfortably. You wouldn't have to worry about money ever again." Jackson's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "This land isn't just property, son. It's our history, our legacy. Your grandfather cleared this land by hand. Your great-grandfather built that barn that's still standing. You can't put a price tag on that." The conversation had ended in familiar frustration, with neither man willing to concede. Now, as Jackson navigated the treacherous road alone, he couldn't help but question how much longer he could maintain this stubborn resistance. The mortgage payment was due in 2 weeks, and the unexpected equipment repairs last month had depleted his emergency fund. The truck rounded a sharp bend, and Jackson instinctively slowed as the road narrowed further. This section always required extra caution, with a steep drop-off to the right and a rock face to the left, creating a natural bottleneck. As he eased through the passage, something unusual caught his eye: a disturbed section of trees about 300 yards down the slope. Jackson stopped the truck, reaching for the binoculars he kept in the glove compartment. Bringing them to his eyes, he adjusted the focus until the distant anomaly became clear. His breath caught in his throat. The distinctive shape of helicopter wreckage was visible among the trees, its dark metal frame contrasting sharply against the pristine white snow. Fresh tracks in the snow indicated it had happened recently, perhaps during last night's storm, when visibility would have been nearly zero. "Jesus Christ," Jackson whispered, immediately reaching for his radio. But as he lifted the handset, he hesitated. Cell service was non-existent in this remote area of the property, and the radio had limited range. He was at least 40 minutes from the nearest neighbor and over an hour from town. If there were survivors, they didn't have time to wait. Decision made. Jackson grabbed his emergency kit from behind the seat, a habit instilled by decades of mountain living where self-reliance wasn't a choice but a necessity. The pack contained basic first aid supplies, emergency rations, a flashlight, matches, and other survival essentials. He pulled on his heavy winter jacket, secured his hat and gloves, and slung the pack over his shoulder. The descent down the steep, snow-covered slope required all of Jackson's mountaineering experience. He moved methodically, using trees for support, carefully testing each foothold before committing his weight. A fall here could mean a broken leg or worse, and no one would come looking for him until much later. As he drew closer to the crash site, the extent of the damage became increasingly apparent. The helicopter had struck the trees at a significant speed, shearing off its tail section before the main cabin came to rest, wedged between two massive pines. The dark green color and sleek design suggested it wasn't a standard civilian craft. Snow had partially covered the wreckage, but thin wisps of smoke still rose from what remained of the engine compartment. Jackson's heart raced with renewed urgency. The crash was recent enough that the engine was still hot, which meant anyone inside might still be alive. "Hello," Jackson called out, his voice swallowed by the vastness of the mountain landscape. "Anyone there? Can you hear me?" Only the mournful whistle of wind through the damaged metal answered him. Approaching cautiously, Jackson circled the wreckage, assessing the situation with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to evaluating dangerous situations quickly. The cockpit windshield was shattered, and what he could see of the interior looked catastrophic. The pilot's side had taken the brunt of the impact, with the control panel crushed inward. Jackson worked his way around to the passenger door, which appeared less damaged. He braced himself, mentally preparing for what he might find inside. The door had been warped by the impact but remained intact. Jackson gripped the handle and pulled, muscles straining against the twisted metal. With a grating screech that echoed through the silent forest, the door finally gave way. The sight that greeted Jackson made his blood run cold. The pilot, a man in his 40s wearing what appeared to be a government-issue flight suit, was clearly dead. His vacant eyes stared sightlessly forward, his body crushed by the collapsed control panel. But it wasn't the pilot's condition that caused Jackson's pulse to quicken. It was the contents of the helicopter. Scattered across the cabin were leather briefcases and folders, bearing official diplomatic seals. Papers with classified stamped in bold red letters were strewn everywhere, some stained with blood. In the passenger seat, a sleek metal briefcase was handcuffed to the wrist of another man, also deceased, wearing an expensive suit beneath a heavy winter coat. Jackson stood frozen, his mind racing to process what he was seeing. This was no ordinary helicopter crash. The diplomatic seals, the classified documents, the handcuffed briefcase, he had stumbled upon something significant, something that powerful people would undoubtedly want to keep secret. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A sudden noise from deeper within the cabin snapped Jackson back to reality. A faint groan emanated from the rear passenger area, partially obscured by collapsed interior paneling. Moving carefully across the shattered glass and twisted metal, Jackson peered into the back section of the helicopter. A third person was there, a woman, perhaps in her 30s, pinned beneath a section of the collapsed roof. Unlike the others, she showed signs of life, her chest rising and falling with labored breaths, her face contorted in pain, even in unconsciousness. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Jackson called, already assessing how he might reach her. The space was tight, with jagged metal creating a dangerous obstacle course between him and the injured woman. He would need to be extremely careful to avoid causing further injury to her or himself. Working methodically, Jackson cleared away debris, creating a path to the woman. As he got closer, he could see that her injuries were severe, but not immediately life-threatening. A gash across her forehead had left a trail of blood down her face, and her left arm was bent at an unnatural angle. Most concerning was the section of metal pinning her legs. Jackson reached out, pressing his fingers gently against her neck to check for a pulse. It was there, weak but steady. At his touch, the woman's eyes fluttered open, confusion and fear immediately flooding her expression. "Don't move," Jackson advised calmly, falling back on the steady voice he'd used with injured animals on his farm. "You've been in an accident. I'm here to help." The woman's eyes darted around wildly before focusing on Jackson's face. "Who?" she began, her voice a raspy whisper. "Name's Jackson Reeves. My farm's about a quarter-mile up the mountain. I saw your helicopter go down." Recognition of their situation seemed to hit her all at once. "The others?" she asked, grimacing with the effort of speaking. Jackson shook his head slightly. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It's just you." The woman closed her eyes briefly, pain of both the physical and emotional variety evident on her face. When she opened them again, there was a new intensity in her gaze. "You need to leave," she said with surprising force given her condition. "Now, take nothing, tell no one what you've seen. For your own safety." Jackson frowned. "Ma'am, you're badly injured. You need medical attention." "You don't understand," she insisted, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "This wasn't an accident. If they find out you were here—" She trailed off, wincing as a wave of pain washed over her. A chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air ran down Jackson's spine. He glanced again at the classified documents scattered throughout the cabin, the diplomatic seals, the handcuffed briefcase. Whatever this was, it was well beyond the scope of his simple farming life. "What's your name?" Jackson asked, deciding to focus on the immediate problem keeping this woman alive. She hesitated before answering. "Dr. Elena Chambers, Department of Defense Research Division." "All right, Dr. Chambers. First things first, I need to get you out from under this debris and someplace warm. Then we can figure out the rest." Elena nodded weakly, seeming to recognize the logic in his approach. Jackson examined the piece of metal pinning her legs. It was heavy but not impossible to move with leverage. He explained what he was going to do, then positioned himself to lift the debris while minimizing any further injury to her. "On 3, he instructed. 1, 2, 3. Jackson strained against the weight, muscles burning with the effort. Slowly, the metal panel lifted, revealing Elena's legs beneath. Though her pants were torn and blood-soaked, there didn't appear to be any catastrophic damage to her limbs. "Can you move your legs?" Jackson asked, still holding the debris. Elena cautiously attempted to shift her position. "Yes," she confirmed, relief evident in her voice. "I think they're bruised, maybe cut, but not broken." "Good. I'm going to set this down to the side, then help you out. Ready?" With careful movements, Jackson deposited the metal panel away from them, then turned his attention back to Elena. Moving her would be challenging, but necessary. The temperature was dropping as afternoon faded toward evening, and the helicopter offered little protection from the elements. As he helped Elena maneuver through the wreckage toward the door, Jackson couldn't help but notice her frequent glances toward the handcuffed briefcase. Whatever was inside clearly weighed on her mind, even as she fought through her physical pain. Once they reached the door, Jackson paused. Getting up that slope is going to be tough in your condition. My truck's at the top. Think you can make it if I help you?" Elena assessed the steep incline with a grimace. "I don't have much choice, do I?" "Afraid not. Unless you want to wait here while I go for help, but that would take hours." She shook her head firmly. "No, we can't stay here. And we can't involve authorities." "Not yet." Jackson frowned at this, but didn't press the issue. Whatever was happening here was clearly complicated, and his priority was getting this injured woman to safety. The rest could be sorted out later. "Let me check for anything useful before we go," he said, turning back to the helicopter's interior. His trained farmer's eye sought practical items, first aid supplies, water, anything that might aid their journey. In a compartment near the pilot's seat, Jackson found a medical kit more comprehensive than his own basic supplies. He also located a satellite phone, though it appeared damaged in the crash. As he gathered these items, Elena's voice came from behind him, tense and urgent. "The silver case. We need to take it." Jackson turned to see her gesturing toward the handcuffed briefcase, still attached to the deceased passenger. "That's evidence in whatever happened here," he said cautiously. "Shouldn't we leave it for authorities?" Elena's eyes hardened. "If the wrong people find that case before the right ones do, the consequences would be devastating. National security is at stake." Jackson hesitated. Everything about this situation went against his straightforward nature. He was a farmer, not a government agent or a hero in some spy thriller. Yet something in Elena's expression, a combination of fear and resolve, convinced him she was telling the truth, at least as she understood it. "How do we get it off him?" he asked finally. "Check his pockets for a key. If that fails, we may need to." She didn't finish the sentence, but her meaning was clear. The thought of searching the dead man's body made Jackson's stomach turn, but he steeled himself and approached the passenger. With reluctant movements, he checked the man's coat pockets, then his pants. In an inner suit pocket, his fingers closed around a small metal object, a handcuff key. With the key retrieved, Jackson carefully unlocked the handcuff from the deceased passenger's wrist, trying not to focus on the unnatural coldness of the man's skin. The briefcase now free, he lifted it, surprised by its substantial weight. "Got it," he confirmed, turning back to Elena, who had managed to prop herself in the doorway, her face pale but determined. "Good," she nodded. "Now we need to move quickly. Is there anything flammable in here?" "Fuel lines, exposed wiring?" Jackson understood immediately what she was suggesting. "You want to destroy the evidence." "I want to ensure sensitive information doesn't fall into the wrong hands," she corrected. "And yes, that means making sure anything left here isn't readable." The ethical implications of what she was asking weighed heavily on Jackson. Destroying a crash site seemed wrong on multiple levels. Yet if what Elena said about national security was true, "There's aviation fuel leaking from the rear," he said finally. "Wouldn't take much to ignite it." Elena nodded grimly. "That should be sufficient. Once we're at a safe distance, we'll need to trigger it." Jackson secured the briefcase and medical supplies in his pack, then carefully helped Elena out of the wreckage. Supporting much of her weight, he guided her a safe distance from the helicopter before setting her down against a tree. "Wait here," he instructed. "I'll be right back." Returning to the helicopter, Jackson worked quickly. He gathered several pieces of paper with classified markings and positioned them near the leaking fuel, creating a trail away from the main puddle. From his emergency kit, he removed a waterproof container of matches. The ethical debate continued to rage in his mind as he struck a match. Was he doing the right thing? Or was he being manipulated into destroying evidence of something sinister? Elena's warning echoed in his thoughts. This wasn't an accident. With a silent apology to the deceased men in the helicopter, Jackson lit the paper trail and quickly retreated. He reached Elena just as the fire caught the main fuel source, igniting with a whoosh that sent heat washing over them, even at their distance. "We need to move," Jackson urged, helping Elena to her feet. "That fire will be visible for miles." The ascent up the steep slope was grueling. Elena did her best to assist, but her injuries limited her mobility significantly. Jackson bore most of her weight, his muscles burning with the effort as they slowly made progress upward. Behind them, the helicopter fire intensified, black smoke now rising above the tree line. "Someone will see that smoke," Jackson noted between labored breaths. "Yes," Elena agreed grimly. "Which is why we need to be gone before they arrive." Halfway up the slope, they paused to rest, both of them breathing heavily. Elena leaned against a tree, her face etched with pain but her eyes alert, constantly scanning their surroundings. "You said this is your land?" she asked. Jackson nodded. "Eastern edge of my property. Been in my family for 3 generations. Is there somewhere we can go? Somewhere secure, away from your main residence?" The question raised Jackson's suspicions again. "Why? What exactly are you involved in, Dr. Chambers?" Elena met his gaze directly. "The less you know right now, the safer you'll be. But I promise, once we're secure, I'll explain what I can." Jackson wasn't satisfied with this answer, but he recognized the practicality of focusing on their immediate survival. "There's an old hunting cabin about 2 miles from the main house. Hasn't been used much in recent years, but it's solid, has a wood stove, basic supplies." "That sounds perfect," Elena nodded. "Private, difficult to find unless you know it's there." "Exactly," Jackson confirmed, helping her to her feet again. "But first, we need to reach my truck." They resumed their slow ascent, the sound of the burning helicopter fading behind them as they climbed. By the time they reached the road where Jackson had parked his truck, Elena was barely conscious, the exertion having taken its toll on her injured body. Jackson helped her into the passenger seat, then secured the briefcase and supplies in the back before climbing in himself. As he started the engine, he cast one last glance down the slope. The helicopter was now fully engulfed in flames, the black smoke visible even through the trees. "What have I gotten myself into?" he murmured, putting the truck in gear and carefully navigating back onto the narrow mountain road. Beside him, Elena had slipped into unconsciousness, her breathing shallow but stable. The mysterious briefcase sat behind them, its contents unknown yet apparently valuable enough to risk lives for. And somewhere out there, Jackson suspected, people would already be responding to the crash, people who, according to Elena, might not have the nation's best interests at heart. As the truck wound its way through the snowy mountain landscape, Jackson Reeves, simple farmer and now reluctant conspirator, felt the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. Whatever happened next, his life had irrevocably changed the moment he'd opened that helicopter door. The drive to the hunting cabin seemed interminable as Jackson navigated the treacherous mountain roads. Every bump caused Elena to wince in her unconscious state, her head lolling against the window. Jackson's mind raced, questioning the wisdom of his decisions. He had destroyed evidence at a crash site, was harboring an injured government agent, and was carrying a classified briefcase, all potentially federal offenses. Yet something in Elena's desperate warning had resonated with his instincts for self-preservation. As the truck rounded a bend, Jackson spotted movement in his rearview mirror, a black SUV appearing on the road behind him, moving with purpose. His grip tightened on the wheel. Coincidence? Or something more sinister? Taking no chances, he turned off the main forest road onto an unmarked trail that only locals knew existed, a shortcut to the cabin that would be nearly impossible for outsiders to follow. The hunting cabin came into view, a sturdy log structure nestled among towering pines, deliberately difficult to spot unless you knew exactly where to look. Jackson parked behind the cabin, concealing the truck from the road. Elena stirred as the engine died, her eyes fluttering open. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Safe place. Need to get you inside. Jackson reached across to help her, but Elena's attention had fixed on something beyond the windshield. Following her gaze, Jackson froze. Standing at the corner of the cabin was a man he'd never seen before. Tall, military straight posture, dressed in dark winter gear that blended with the forest. Most concerning was the pistol held casually at his side. Dr. Chambers, the man called, his voice carrying across the clearing. And you must be Mr. Reeves. I believe you have something that belongs to us. Jackson looked at Elena, whose face had drained of what little color remained. Trust no one, she whispered, clutching Jackson's arm with surprising strength. Whatever happens, that case can't fall into the wrong hands. The sun began its descent behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the snow-covered clearing as Jackson Reeves faced the armed stranger. His farming life had taught him patience, careful assessment before action, and now those instincts kicked in. The man's stance, equipment, and demeanor all suggested professional training, military or intelligence. But whose side was he on? How do you know our names? Jackson called out, buying time while he evaluated their limited options. The man smiled without warmth. We've been tracking the helicopter's emergency beacon. As for you, Mr. Reeves, property records are public. He took a casual step forward. I'm Agent Foster. Dr. Chambers knows my organization. I'm here to secure sensitive materials and provide medical evacuation. Jackson felt Elena's hand tighten on his arm. He's lying, she whispered through gritted teeth. That's not Foster. The truck offered little protection, but running would be suicide, especially with Elena's injuries. Jackson's eyes darted to his glove compartment, where he kept a revolver for predator, control too far to reach without being noticed. Show me some identification, Jackson demanded, his voice steadier than he felt. The man calling himself Foster sighed. In this situation, conventional protocols are suspended. Dr. Chambers knows this. The helicopter was carrying classified materials that pose a national security risk. We need to contain the situation immediately. Then you won't mind waiting for official backup, Jackson countered. I've already called the sheriff. This bluff caused a subtle shift in the man's demeanor, a tightening around the eyes, a slight adjustment of his grip on the weapon. That would be an unfortunate complication. In that moment of tension, a distant sound cut through the mountain air helicopter rotors, approaching from the east. The man's attention flickered toward the sound, and Jackson seized the opportunity. In one fluid motion, he threw the truck into reverse, accelerating backward while pushing Elena down below the dashboard. Gunshots rang out, shattering the passenger window. Jackson swerved, using the terrain for cover as he navigated blindly, decades of familiarity with his land guiding his movements. He cut sharply around the cabin, putting the solid log structure between them and their attacker, then accelerated onto a narrow trail that plunged into the dense forest. Hold on, he shouted as the truck bounced violently down the rough path, branches scraping against the sides. Elena had pulled herself back into the seat, one hand pressed against a fresh cut on her cheek from the shattered glass. Who was that? Jackson demanded, eyes fixed on the treacherous path ahead. Not who he claimed to be, Elena replied, wincing with each bump. The real Agent Foster was on the helicopter with me. That man is with the group that arranged our crash. The implications settled heavily in Jackson's mind. So this wasn't an accident. Someone deliberately downed your helicopter. Why? Elena's gaze shifted to the briefcase secured behind them. Because of what's in that case. Information that could destabilize global security arrangements if it falls into the wrong hands. The helicopter sounds grew louder, now nearly overhead. Through gaps in the canopy, Jackson glimpsed a sleek black aircraft circling their position. We can't outrun a helicopter, he muttered, making a split-second decision and turning onto an even narrower path that led toward a series of old, mining tunnels he had explored as a youth. The truck would go no further than the tunnel entrance, but inside was a maze of passages known only to locals and a potential route to safety. The terrain became increasingly rough, forcing Jackson to slow despite the danger behind them. Elena braced herself against the dashboard, face pale but determined. "Almost there," Jackson assured her as the truck crawled forward. Just ahead, partially obscured by overgrown vegetation, was the dark mouth of the abandoned mine entrance, large enough for people but not vehicles. Jackson killed the engine and lights. "We'll have to continue on foot. Can you walk?" Elena nodded grimly. "I'll manage." Jackson quickly gathered essential supplies, the briefcase, first aid kit, flashlight, his emergency pack with water and rations. As an afterthought, he retrieved his revolver from the glove compartment. The weapon felt heavy and foreign in his hand, a tool he'd rarely needed to consider using against another human. The helicopter's searchlight swept the forest around them as they hurriedly made their way to the mine entrance. Jackson supported Elena, who moved with determination despite her injuries. Just as they reached the shadowed entrance, the light passed directly over their position. Jackson froze, pulling Elena into the deeper shadows of the rock face. For a heart-stopping moment, he thought they'd been spotted. Then the light continued its sweep, moving beyond their position. Not waiting for it to return, Jackson guided Elena into the dark mouth of the tunnel. The mine entrance gave way to a cool, damp passage supported by ancient timber beams. Jackson clicked on his flashlight, revealing rough-hewn walls that glistened with moisture. "These tunnels run for miles under the mountain," he explained, keeping his voice low. "Some connect to other exits, some dead end. If you don't know the routes, it's easy to get lost forever." Elena leaned against the wall, catching her breath. "And you know the routes?" "Most of them. Explored them as a kid, against my father's orders." A ghost of a smile crossed Jackson's weathered face. "Never thought that disobedience would someday save my life." They proceeded deeper into the mountain, Jackson carefully selecting passages at each junction. The sound of the helicopter faded, replaced by the eerie silence of the underground, broken only by their footsteps and labored breathing. After 20 minutes of slow progress, Jackson called a halt in a slightly wider chamber where multiple tunnels intersected. Elena sank gratefully to the ground, her strength visibly waning. "Let me check those injuries properly," Jackson said, setting down their supplies and opening the first aid kit. The helicopter's medical supplies were more advanced than his basic farm kit, including items that looked military grade. As he cleaned and dressed the worst of Elena's wounds, the gash on her forehead, various cuts from shattered glass, and a concerning bruise spreading across her ribcage, Jackson finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "What exactly is in that briefcase that's worth killing for?" Elena was silent for a long moment, clearly weighing her response. Finally, she spoke. "Evidence of a conspiracy within certain government agencies to sell classified weapons technology to foreign powers. Names, dates, transaction records, everything needed to expose a network of traitors operating at the highest levels." Jackson's hands stilled. "That's why your helicopter was shot down. To eliminate the evidence?" "And the witnesses," Elena confirmed grimly. "We were transporting this evidence to a secure facility when we were attacked. The pilot tried to evade, but they'd sabotaged the fuel line as backup. We never had a chance." The enormity of the situation settled over Jackson. He was now entangled in something far beyond his understanding: government conspiracies, classified intelligence, assassins. His simple farming life seemed a distant memory. "So what now?" he asked, finishing the bandage on Elena's forehead. "We can't hide in these tunnels forever. I need to contact specific individuals I trust, people who can secure the evidence and ensure it reaches the proper authorities. But our communications will be monitored. They'll be watching airports, bus stations, main roads. Jackson considered their limited options. There's a town about 15 miles from here, across the mountain. Small enough to fly under the radar, big enough to have resources. We could reach it by tomorrow if we pace ourselves. Elena nodded, then hesitated. Jackson, you should know by helping me, you've put yourself in their crosshairs. These people don't leave loose ends. The warning was unnecessary. Jackson had already crossed that Rubicon the moment he opened the helicopter door. I'm already involved. Might as well see it through. They rested for an hour, sharing water and energy bars from Jackson's pack. Elena's condition stabilized somewhat with the medical attention and rest, though she remained weak from blood loss and trauma. As they prepared to move on, a distant sound echoed through the tunnels, voices and the beam of flashlights playing along the walls from the direction they had entered. They found the tunnel entrance, Jackson whispered, hastily gathering their supplies. We need to move. They proceeded deeper into the labyrinth, Jackson now selecting passages specifically to confuse pursuit, doubling back, choosing less obvious routes, and at one junction, deliberately leaving misleading signs of their passage in the wrong direction. The pursuit grew fainter as they navigated the complex network of tunnels, but Jackson took no chances, maintaining their pace despite Elena's increasingly labored movements. After what seemed like hours, they reached a junction Jackson recognized. This way leads to an exit on the north face, he explained, gesturing down a narrower passage. It's about a half-mile slightly uphill. Think you can make it? Elena nodded determinedly, though her face was gray with exhaustion. Lead on. The tunnel gradually angled upward, the air growing fresher as they approached the exit. Jackson slowed their pace, cautious about what might await them outside. When they reached the final stretch, he motioned for Elena to wait while he scouted ahead. The exit was a narrow opening, partially collapsed and overgrown with vegetation, nearly invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Jackson carefully peered out, scanning the snow-covered landscape beyond. The night had fully descended, with only moonlight illuminating the terrain. No sign of pursuers, but that didn't mean they weren't there. He returned to Elena, who had slumped against the wall, her energy reserves clearly depleted. Exit looks clear, but we're exposed until we reach the tree line about 50 yards away. We don't have much choice, Elena replied, straightening with visible effort. Every minute we delay gives them time to set up a perimeter. Jackson nodded grimly. Stay close to me. Move as quickly and quietly as possible. They emerged from the mine into the bitter cold of the mountain night. The temperature had dropped significantly, their breath forming clouds in the moonlight. Elena shivered violently, her thin government-issue clothing inadequate for the harsh conditions. Jackson removed his heavy outer jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders despite her protests. You're injured and in shock. Hypothermia will kill you faster than it will me. They made their way carefully toward the tree line, each step crunching softly in the snow despite their best efforts. The moonlight created a beautiful but treacherous landscape of deep shadows and brilliant reflective surfaces. They were halfway to the trees when a sound froze them in place, the unmistakable mechanical whir of a drone. Down, Jackson hissed, pulling Elena into a shallow depression in the snow. The drone appeared moments later, a small quadcopter with a thermal camera clearly visible on its underside. It hovered methodically, scanning the area in a grid pattern. Thermal imaging, Elena whispered. It will pick up our body heat signature against the snow. Jackson's mind raced, evaluating their limited options. The drone was between them and the forest, cutting off their escape route. As it completed another sweep and began turning in their direction, he made a desperate decision. When I move, run for the trees. Don't stop, don't look back. Before Elena could protest, Jackson stood and sprinted away from their position, deliberately making himself visible. As predicted, the drone immediately changed course to track him. He zigzagged across the open ground, drawing it further from Alana's position. The drone operator took the bait, focusing on the more active target. Jackson led it on a chaotic path, glimpsing from the corner of his eye that Elena had begun moving toward the trees, the briefcase clutched against her chest. Jackson changed direction abruptly, now heading directly for a stand of pines. The drone adjusted to follow, descending slightly for a better view, exactly what Jackson had hoped for. As it drew near, he spun and fired 2 quick shots from his revolver. The first missed, but the second struck one of the rotors. The drone spiraled erratically, then crashed into the snow. Jackson didn't wait to see if it would recover, immediately racing toward where Elena had disappeared into the tree line. He found her 30 yards into the forest, leaning heavily against a tree. "They'll send someone to investigate the drone's last position," she warned between labored breaths. "Then we keep moving," Jackson replied simply, taking some of her weight as they pushed deeper into the forest. They traveled through the night, the dense canopy providing cover from aerial surveillance, but making the ground treacherous with hidden obstacles. Jackson navigated by the stars glimpsed through breaks in the trees, maintaining their course toward the distant town. Elena's condition deteriorated as they progressed, her movements becoming increasingly uncoordinated, her skin cold and clammy despite the exertion. Jackson recognized the signs of advancing shock and knew they needed shelter soon. Near dawn, they reached a small clearing where an old Forest Service cabin stood little more than a simple shelter for rangers during fire season, but a potential lifeline in their desperate situation. The cabin was basic but secure, a single room with a wood stove, rough-hewn table, and 2 bunks. Most importantly, it was stocked with emergency supplies, dry firewood, canned food, a first aid kit, and even a battery-powered radio. Jackson secured the door and quickly set about lighting a fire in the wood stove. As warmth gradually filled the small space, he turned his attention back to Elena, who had collapsed onto one of the bunks, shivering uncontrollably. "Stay with me, Dr. Chambers," he urged, checking her pulse rapid and weak. Hypothermia compounded by blood loss and shock had pushed her to the brink. Jackson knew the basics of wilderness first aid, but this was beyond his expertise. He wrapped her in the emergency blanket stored in the cabin, then prepared a hot drink from the supplies. "Small sips," he instructed, supporting her head as she drank. Elena's eyes focused on him with difficulty. "The briefcase," she murmured. "Safe," Jackson assured her, nodding to where he had placed it beside the bunk. "No one followed us here." As warmth returned to her body, Elena's condition stabilized somewhat. Her breathing became more regular, and some color returned to her face. Jackson redressed her wounds with supplies from the cabin's first aid kit, noting with concern that some showed signs of infection beginning. "We need to get you to proper medical care," he said finally. Elena shook her head weakly. "Not until the evidence is secure. There's a USB drive hidden in the briefcase lining, a backup of everything. If something happens to me, you need to get it to Senator Harriman. No one else." "No one's dying here," Jackson replied firmly, though the gravity of her contingency planning wasn't lost on him. "Once you're stronger, we'll figure out our next move." The Forest Service radio crackled to life suddenly, making them both jump. After a moment of static, a voice came through a standard emergency broadcast reporting a helicopter crash in the national forest, warning civilians to avoid the area due to a hazardous materials situation, and announcing that federal agents had established a security perimeter. "They're controlling the narrative," Elena observed grimly, "creating a cover story." Jackson switched off the radio, troubled by the implications. "How far does this conspiracy reach?" "Far enough to shoot down a government helicopter and deploy kill teams on U.S. soil," Elena replied. "Far enough that we can't risk official channels." As morning light filtered through the cabin's single window, Jackson checked their surroundings, careful to remain hidden from outside view. No signs of pursuit yet, but he harbored no illusions about their safety. The cabin might provide temporary shelter, but they remained in grave danger. Elena had fallen into a restless sleep, her body desperately trying to recover from trauma. Jackson used the opportunity to examine the briefcase more closely. It was a standard diplomatic security case, heavy-duty aluminum with multiple locks, designed to withstand significant damage. The handcuffs had left marks on the handle where they'd been attached. He didn't attempt to open it, respecting both the classified nature of its contents and Elena's trust. Instead, he focused on their immediate survival needs and planning their next move. The town Elena had mentioned was still at least a day's journey away, and she was in no condition to travel. As Jackson inventoried their supplies and plotted potential routes on a Forest Service map found in the cabin, he couldn't help reflecting on the extraordinary turn his life had taken. 24 hours ago, his biggest concern had been repairing fences and making mortgage payments. Now he was harboring a government agent, evading assassins, and protecting state secrets. The simple farmer from Colorado had been thrust into a world of international intrigue and lethal stakes, a world he was woefully unprepared for. Yet something in Elena's desperate warning had resonated with his core values. Whatever conspiracy she had uncovered threatened not just national security, but the fundamental principles he believed in. For a man who had spent his life nurturing and protecting his small piece of America, the decision to help was ultimately simple. Some battles chose you, rather than the other way around. As the morning sun illuminated the snow-covered forest surrounding their temporary haven, Jackson Reeves accepted that his life would never be the same and prepared for whatever came next. The distant cry of a hawk pulled Jackson from his vigilant watch at the cabin window, nature's routines continuing despite the chaos of human affairs. He checked his watch, nearly noon. Elena had been asleep for several hours, her body fighting to recover from the trauma. Each rise and fall of her chest reassured him, though her pallor and the occasional wince that crossed her features even in sleep concerned him deeply. The Forest Service cabin had become their sanctuary, but Jackson knew it was temporary. Anyone with access to Forest Service records could identify these structures. It was only a matter of time before their pursuers expanded their search to include it. A soft groan from the bunk drew his attention. Elena was awake, her eyes clearer than before, though pain still etched lines around them. "Water?" she asked, voice raspy from dehydration. Jackson helped her sit up, supporting her back as she drank from a canteen. "How's the pain?" "Manageable," she replied, though her grimace suggested otherwise. "How long was I out?" "About 5 hours." "Needed it." Jackson adjusted her blankets before returning to the window. "No signs of pursuit yet, but we can't stay much longer." Elena nodded, gingerly testing her limbs. "I can travel. Just need a moment to." She winced as she shifted position. "Found some over-the-counter pain relievers in the first aid kit," Jackson said, offering 2 pills. "Not prescription strength, but better than nothing." As Elena took the medication, Jackson returned to studying the Forest Service map. "There's a fire road about 2 miles north of here. Rarely used this time of year, but it eventually connects to County Road 22. Too obvious," Elena countered. "They'll have vehicles patrolling all access roads by now." She gestured toward the map. "What's this area here?" Jackson leaned closer. "Marston Creek. Runs down the mountain, eventually reaches private land before connecting with the highway near Pinewood." "How far to Pinewood?" "By creek route? Maybe 10 miles. Rough terrain, though." Elena considered this. Water routes are harder to track. No footprints, less chance of drone surveillance being effective through the tree canopy along the banks. Their planning was interrupted by a faint but unmistakable sound, the distant rumble of vehicles approaching on the forest road. "They've found us," Jackson stated flatly, already gathering their essential supplies. Elena pushed herself upright, fighting through obvious pain. "The briefcase, already packed," Jackson assured her. slinging their emergency bag over his shoulder and securing the revolver at his waist. "Can you walk?" "I'll manage," she replied, determination overriding pain as she stood unsteadily. They exited through the cabin's rear window to avoid leaving obvious tracks at the main entrance. Jackson helped Elena navigate the short drop to the ground, then carefully brushed away any signs of their departure. The forest beyond the cabin sloped downward toward Marston Creek, the terrain becoming increasingly steep and difficult. Jackson supported Elena as they made their way through dense underbrush, both of them aware that speed was essential, but careless noise could betray their position. They had covered perhaps half a mile when the sound of vehicles stopped, followed by the faint calls of men. Their pursuers had reached the cabin. Jackson and Elena froze, listening intently. The voices were too distant to make out words, but the tone was unmistakable, controlled, professional, methodical. "They'll find our trail soon," Elena whispered. Jackson nodded grimly. "We need to reach the creek before they do." They increased their pace, accepting the additional noise as necessary. The terrain grew steeper, requiring them to half-slide down certain sections while gripping trees for stability. Elena's face was a mask of pain and determination, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cold. After 20 grueling minutes, they heard the unmistakable sound of rushing water. Marston Creek came into view, swollen with snowmelt, its icy waters churning between rock-strewn banks. "We follow this downstream?" Elena asked, eyeing the creek dubiously. "Not in it, too cold, too dangerous," Jackson clarified. "But alongside it. The banks are rocky, which will make tracking difficult." They began their journey downstream, picking their way across the uneven terrain. The creek's course cut through the mountain like a natural highway, creating a pathway that, while challenging, offered their best chance of reaching civilization undetected. An hour into their creekside journey, they heard it, the baying of tracking dogs echoing through the forest behind them. "They brought dogs," Elena observed needlessly, her voice tight. Jackson's mind raced. The water. It's our only chance to break the scent trail. Though dangerous, they had no choice. They waded into the frigid creek, gasping as the icy water reached their knees. The current was strong but manageable if they stayed close to the edge. They continued downstream in the water for several hundred yards, the cold numbing their legs and sapping their energy. When Jackson judged they had gone far enough, he guided them back to the opposite bank. The rocky shoreline would hold minimal scent, and the water should have washed away their trail. It wasn't perfect, but it might buy them time. Elena collapsed on the shore, her teeth chattering violently. The creek crossing had drained what little strength she had recovered. "We need to keep moving," Jackson urged, though he knew she needed rest. "The cold is dangerous. We have to generate heat." With supreme effort, Elena pulled herself upright. "Lead on." They continued their downstream journey, moving more slowly now as Elena's condition deteriorated. The afternoon sun provided little warmth beneath the forest canopy, and their wet clothing clung to them, accelerating heat loss. Hypothermia became a more immediate threat than their pursuers. Jackson spotted a small hollow beneath the exposed roots of a massive fallen tree, not ideal, but shelter enough to briefly warm up. Short rest, he decided, guiding Elena into the natural shelter. From his pack, he produced an emergency space blanket, wrapping it around both of them to share body heat. Talk about unorthodox first dates, Elena managed through chattering teeth, a surprising hint of humor breaking through her professional demeanor. Jackson found himself chuckling despite everything. "Not exactly how I planned to spend my Tuesday." As their shared warmth gradually raised their body temperatures, Elena's shivering subsided. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly. "Helping me?" "You could have called authorities, walked away." Jackson considered the question seriously. My grandfather used to say character is revealed in the choices you make when no one's watching. When I found that helicopter, there was no one watching. Just me and a choice. He paused. Besides, my life wasn't exactly overflowing with excitement before this. Struggling farm, bank breathing down my neck, son who thinks I'm a stubborn fool. Not exactly a fair trade, financial troubles for assassins. Maybe not, Jackson acknowledged. But I've lived by certain principles my whole life: truth, integrity, standing against wrongs even when it costs you. Finding that helicopter. It was a test, I suppose. One I couldn't fail without failing myself. Elena studied him with newfound appreciation. The world needs more Jackson Reeveses. The world needs people who do right when it's hard, he corrected. Nothing special about me. The distant barking of dogs interrupted their moment of connection, fainter than before, but still present. Their pursuers hadn't given up. They're still on our trail, but the water crossing confused them, Jackson observed, gathering their things. We should keep moving while we have the advantage. They continued downstream, their pace improved after the brief rest. The creek gradually widened as smaller tributaries joined its flow, the terrain around it becoming less steep as they descended the mountain. By late afternoon, they noticed a change in the forest, the untouched wilderness giving way to occasional signs of human activity. Old logging stumps. A weather-beaten, no trespassing sign. They were approaching private land. We're getting close to the valley, Jackson explained. Another few miles and we'll reach civilization. Farmland first, then the outskirts of Pinewood. Elena nodded, her professional demeanor reasserting itself as they neared potential safety. Once we reach town, I need to find secure communications. There are protocols for situations like this, people I need to contact. And these people, they can be trusted? With absolute certainty, Elena confirmed. But reaching them without exposing ourselves will be the challenge. Our pursuers will be monitoring transportation hubs, communications, surveillance cameras. The sun was beginning its descent behind the mountains when they reached the edge of the forest. Before them stretched open farmland fields lying dormant under winter snow, scattered farmhouses with lights beginning to glow in the early evening. Beyond, perhaps 3 miles distant, they could see the first buildings of Pinewood. Exposed crossing, Jackson noted, surveying the open terrain with concern. No cover for at least a mile. Elena studied the landscape, her analytical mind assessing options. Wait until full dark? Jackson shook his head. Temperature will drop dramatically after sunset. In our condition, that's dangerous. Besides, fresh snow's coming. He gestured to the heavy clouds building in the west. Could be beneficial, cover our tracks, limit visibility for pursuit. But we need to be across this open ground before it hits. They decided to follow a line of fence posts that created minimal visual disruption against the snow, moving during the transition period of dusk when human vision is naturally compromised. The going was painfully slow, each exposed step feeling vulnerable. Halfway across the open farmland, the first snowflakes began to fall, gentle at first, then increasingly heavy as the storm front moved in. The timing was fortuitous, the curtain of white obscuring visibility in all directions. Someone's watching out for us, Jackson muttered, squinting through the thickening snow toward the lights of Pinewood. Elena, who had been silent for some time, conserving her strength, spoke suddenly. Jackson, I need to tell you something. About the contents of the briefcase. Jackson glanced at her, noting the grave seriousness in her expression despite their difficult trek. I thought it was better I didn't know details. Initially, yes. But circumstances have changed. If something happens to me... She paused, gathering her thoughts. What we're carrying isn't just evidence of corruption. It's proof that Operation Blackfish, a classified weapons system officially reported as failed and abandoned, was actually completed and sold to foreign interests. What kind of weapon? Jackson asked, the gravity of her revelation settling over him like the snow on his shoulders. A targeted bioweapon, engineered to affect specific genetic markers. The implications hit Jackson like a physical blow. You mean, a weapon that could target specific races? Ethnic groups? Elena nodded grimly. The ultimate genocide tool. Officially, the program was shut down for ethical reasons. In reality, a group within our government continued development, then sold it to the highest bidder. The snow fell harder around them, mirroring the cold horror that Jackson felt at this revelation. The stakes were suddenly far beyond what he had imagined, not just government corruption, but potential crimes against humanity. The evidence in that case could prevent mass murder, Elena continued. But it also implicates people at the highest levels of government and military leadership. People willing to kill to keep their secrets. They pressed on through the thickening storm, each carrying this knowledge like an additional weight. The lights of Pinewood grew gradually clearer, civilization and potential safety beckoning. As they reached the outskirts of town, the modest cluster of buildings looked like a metropolis after their wilderness ordeal. Jackson led them toward a residential area, avoiding the more exposed main street. Where are we going? Elena asked, her strength clearly fading again. I know someone here, Jackson explained. Old friend who owes me a favor. His discretion personified. The house was small, set back from the road, with a weathered pickup truck in the driveway. Jackson approached cautiously, surveying the surroundings before leading Elena to the back door. His knock was answered by a gruff voice. Who's there? It's Jackson Reeves, Frank. Need some help. There was a pause, then the sound of multiple locks being disengaged. The door opened to reveal a man in his 60s, silver-haired and lean, with the watchful eyes of someone accustomed to caution. Those eyes widened at the sight of them, disheveled, injured, clearly in trouble. Jesus, Jackson. What happened to you? It's complicated, Frank. Can we come in? Need to stay out of sight. Frank hesitated only briefly before stepping aside. You in some kind of trouble? The kind that's better you don't know details, Jackson replied honestly. Frank nodded, accepting this. That bad, huh? Well, you pulled my grandson from that river when no one else would go in. Reckon that buys you whatever help you need. He ushered them into a modest kitchen, the warmth of the house enveloping them like an embrace after their time in the elements. Elena nearly collapsed into a chair, her reserves finally depleted. Your friend needs medical attention, Frank observed. Nothing that can be officially documented, Jackson clarified. At least not yet. Frank's eyebrows rose, but he asked no further questions. Marge was a nurse for 30 years before she passed. Got her supplies in the back room. Not hospital standard, but better than nothing. As Frank retrieved the medical kit, Jackson helped Elena remove her jacket. The makeshift bandages they'd applied in the forest cabin were soaked through, some of her wounds having reopened during their difficult journey. Frank returned with an extensive first aid kit and a set of clean clothes. Marge's things, he explained. Kept meaning to donate them. Yes, they found their purpose. While Frank prepared hot food, Jackson helped clean and properly dress Elena's wounds. The supplies were indeed comprehensive: antibiotics, proper bandages, even a suture kit, which thankfully they didn't need to use. Elena accepted the ministration stoically, though Jackson could see the pain etched in the tight lines around her mouth. When he finished, she looked markedly better, still injured, but no longer on the verge of collapse. Thank you, she said simply, the words encompassing more than just the immediate medical care. Frank returned with bowls of steaming stew and fresh bread, placing them on the table without ceremony. Eat, then you can tell me what help you need. The simple, hearty food was exactly what their bodies required after the ordeal of the past day. They ate in grateful silence, warmth and sustenance gradually restoring their energy. After the meal, Frank poured 3 cups of coffee and sat across from them. All right. Cards on the table. Military or law enforcement looking for you. Jackson and Elena exchanged glances. Both, technically, Elena admitted. But not the good guys. Frank considered this. Figured as much from your condition. Not running from the law for fun, I'd wager. We need secure communications, Elena explained. Untraceable. And eventually transportation out of town, avoiding main roads and checkpoints. That's a tall order for a small town, Frank observed. But not impossible. He seemed to make a decision. Phones in the study. Landline, old school. No extensions, no recordings, transportation. That's trickier. Town's small enough that strangers get noticed. Elena nodded. We'll work out the details. For now, the secure call is priority. Frank stood, gesturing toward a hallway. Study's last door on the left. Take your time. I'll keep watch out front. Elena rose, the classified briefcase clutched firmly in her hand. Before following Frank's directions, she turned to Jackson. I won't be long. What I'm about to do, it sets things in motion that can't be stopped. Good, Jackson replied simply. Some things shouldn't be stopped. As Elena disappeared down the hallway, Frank regarded Jackson with newfound curiosity. Never figured you for international intrigue, Jackson. Thought you were just a simple farmer fighting the good fight against nature and banks. Still am, Jackson said with a tired smile. Just got a bit more complicated recently. Frank nodded sagely. Life has a way of testing us when we least expect it. Throwing challenges at us to see what we're really made of. He glanced toward the hallway where Elena had disappeared. Whatever you two stumbled into, I'm guessing it's bigger than just yourselves. Much bigger, Jackson confirmed without elaboration. Good people standing against wrong. That's been the story of progress throughout history, Frank mused. Not governments or organizations, but individuals who refuse to look away when they witness injustice. The simple wisdom resonated with Jackson, articulating what he had felt intuitively when he'd made the decision to help Elena. Sometimes the right path was simply refusing to walk away when confronted with wrong, regardless of the personal cost. Elena returned 20 minutes later, her posture subtly changed, more assured, as if a critical mission milestone had been achieved. It's done, she said simply. Extraction team is mobilizing. 8 hours until contact. 8 hours. The number hung in the air between them. 8 hours to remain hidden, to stay ahead of pursuers who by now would be expanding their search to include Pinewood and surrounding areas. 8 hours that would determine whether the evidence they carried would reach those who could act on it, or be buried forever along with them. Jackson met Elena's gaze, reading both determination and apprehension there. Whatever came next, they were committed to seeing it through together. A farmer and a government agent united by circumstances neither could have imagined, but bound by a shared understanding that some battles chose you, rather than the other way around. As the snow continued to fall outside Frank's windows, obscuring tracks and creating a temporary barrier between them and those who hunted them, Jackson realized that his simple life had been irrevocably changed. Yet somehow he couldn't bring himself to regret opening that helicopter door. Some choices define a person, revealing character in moments of unexpected testing. And in that moment of testing, Jackson Reeves had discovered something about himself worth far more than the farm he might lose. The unshakable knowledge that when it mattered most, he had chosen right over easy, courage over safety, truth over comfortable ignorance. The 8 hours ahead would determine many things, but not that essential truth. Whatever happened next, Jackson knew he would face it without regret. The snowfall intensified as night deepened over Pinewood, creating a natural veil that concealed their presence, but also complicated any potential movement. Jackson stood at Frank's kitchen window, peering through a narrow gap in the curtains at the transformed world outside. The street lamps created halos in the swirling white, their light barely penetrating the thick curtain of snow. The storm had become their ally, at least temporarily. Frank entered from the living room, his movements deliberately quiet. "Got the radio scanner working," he reported, keeping his voice low. "Police frequencies are active. They're setting up checkpoints on all roads leading out of town. Not local police, either some kind of federal operation." "How many?" Jackson asked, not turning from his vigil. "Hard to say exactly. Sounds like at least 3 teams. They're being careful with their communications, using coded language. But they're definitely looking for someone." Frank glanced toward the hallway where Elena was resting in the spare bedroom. "Your friend stirred up one hell of a hornet's nest." Jackson nodded grimly. "Any mention of the extraction team she contacted?" Frank shook his head. "Nothing obvious. But if they're professionals, they wouldn't be broadcasting their movements." The extraction team represented their best hope operatives trusted by Elena, who could secure the evidence and ensure it reached the proper authorities. But with hostiles already in Pinewood, the question loomed large. Could they remain hidden for the remaining hours until the team arrived? "We need contingencies," Jackson decided. "If they start going door to door—" "Already ahead of you," Frank replied, moving to a closed door at the rear of the kitchen. He unlocked it, revealing stairs descending into darkness. Root cellar. Converted it to a tornado shelter years ago. Reinforced walls, separate ventilation, emergency supplies. Not comfortable, but it's secure and impossible to find unless you know it's there. Jackson examined the hidden room with approval. "Let's hope we don't need it." They returned to the kitchen where Frank prepared another pot of coffee. The adrenaline that had carried them through their ordeal had long since faded, replaced by a bone-deep weariness that threatened Jackson's vigilance. The hot, bitter coffee would help keep them alert through the long night ahead. "Your son called while you were checking on your friend," Frank mentioned casually, pouring 2 mugs. "Michael. Said he'd been trying to reach you. Got worried when you didn't answer." Jackson stiffened. "What did you tell him?" "That you'd stopped by earlier to borrow some equipment. Mentioned heading into town for supplies before the storm hit. Nothing about your current situation." Relief washed over Jackson, followed immediately by concern. Michael shouldn't be involved in this. "It's too dangerous." Frank nodded his understanding. "Told him I'd have you call when you got back. Figure that buys you some time." The mention of Michael brought Jackson's ordinary life rushing back into focus. The struggling farm, the pending mortgage payment, the strained relationship with his son. It all seemed distant now, belonging to a different reality than the one where he currently existed, harboring government secrets and evading assassins. If when this was over, would there be anything of that life left to return to? Or had opening that helicopter door set him irrevocably on a new path? A soft sound from the hallway interrupted these thoughts. Elena appeared in the doorway, looking stronger after a few hours of proper rest. She had changed into the clothes Frank had provided, simple jeans and a flannel shirt that might have belonged to any local resident, perfect camouflage in a small town. "Checkpoints on all roads out," Jackson informed her, sliding a mug of coffee across the table. Elena nodded, unsurprised. "They're following protocol. Establish perimeter, then tighten the noose. They'll start with transportation hubs, hotels, then expand to house by house if necessary." "How long until they reach this neighborhood?" Frank asked. Elena considered. "With the storm hampering movement, maybe 4 hours. Less if they get lucky. 4 hours against their 8-hour extraction timeline." The math wasn't encouraging. "Your extraction team," Jackson began. "How will they approach with these checkpoints in place?" A ghost of a smile crossed Elena's face. "They have resources beyond conventional transportation. The storm actually works in their favor, limits surveillance capabilities, creates natural cover. Frank cleared his throat. Not to be the bearer of bad news, but even if your team gets in, how do you plan to get out? Every road is watched, and this storm makes cross-country travel nearly suicidal. It was a valid question that hung in the air between them. Elena sipped her coffee before responding. The extraction will be aerial. Specialized team, specialized equipment. But they need a suitable landing zone, away from the town center, with minimal civilian exposure. Jackson exchanged glances with Frank, an unspoken communication passing between them. The old mill, Frank suggested. About a mile outside town limits. Abandoned for 20 years, wide open space around it, no nearby residences. Jackson nodded. Good sight lines in all directions. Could spot any approach. Solid structure for shelter while waiting. Elena considered this. How far from here? On foot in these conditions? 40 minutes, maybe longer, Jackson estimated. We should move soon then, Elena decided. Being mobile gives us advantages. Staying in one place, especially a residence that could be searched, increases risk. The logic was sound, but Jackson eyed Elena's condition with concern. She had improved markedly since their arrival, but she was far from fully recovered. Another journey through the brutal winter night would tax her limited reserves. As if reading his thoughts, Elena straightened her posture. I'm stronger than I look, Jackson. And I've operated under far worse conditions. Frank, who had been silent during this exchange, moved to a closet near the back door. If you're going out in this, you'll need better gear. He rummaged inside, emerging with heavy winter coats, boots, and insulated gloves. These were meant for ice fishing. Not stylish, but they'll keep you alive. As they prepared to depart, Jackson pulled Frank aside. If anyone comes looking. Frank waved away his concern. I'll tell them I haven't seen you in weeks. Been alone all night during the storm. Don't worry about me. I've been keeping secrets in this town for 40 years. Jackson clasped the older man's shoulder. I owe you. Consider it repayment for saving my grandson, Frank replied simply. Just make sure whatever you're carrying gets where it needs to go. Sounds important. More than you know, Jackson confirmed. Frank nodded, then handed Jackson a set of keys. Almost forgot. Old service entrance behind the mill is padlocked. These should still work used to do maintenance there before they shut it down. This final piece of assistance could prove crucial. Jackson pocketed the keys gratefully. They exited through Frank's back door into the heart of the storm. The snow had transformed the landscape into an alien terrain, familiar landmarks obscured beneath white drifts that reached mid-calf. The wind cut through even their improved winter gear, carrying ice crystals that stung any exposed skin. Elena clutched the briefcase tightly against her body, its contents now more precious than ever as they approached the culmination of their journey. Jackson led the way, using his intimate knowledge of the small town to navigate by memory when visibility failed. They moved through residential backyards, avoiding the main streets where patrols might be operating despite the storm. The heavy snowfall concealed their tracks almost as quickly as they made them, nature conspiring to hide their passage. 20 minutes into their journey, they reached the edge of town where residential areas gave way to light industrial zones. The old mill stood a quarter-mile beyond, its silhouette barely visible through the curtain of white. As they paused in the shelter of an abandoned warehouse, a new sound reached them beneath the howl of the wind engines approaching from the direction they had come. Vehicles, Jackson warned, pulling Elena deeper into the shadows. Moments later, 3 black SUVs crawled past on the nearby road, their progress slowed by the treacherous conditions, but their purpose unmistakable. Rooftop spotlights cut through the darkness, sweeping across buildings and open spaces. Search pattern, Elena observed quietly. They're expanding their perimeter. They waited until the vehicles had passed before continuing, now moving with renewed urgency. The old mill represented their best chance, defensible, isolated, with clear sight lines to spot both friendlies and hostiles approaching. The final approach to the mill took them across an open field, the most exposed part of their journey. They crossed quickly despite the deep snow, aware of their vulnerability should any of the search teams happen to turn their lights in this direction. The mill loomed before them, a massive brick structure that had once been the economic heart of Pinewood. Its abandoned state was evident in the broken windows and crumbling mortar, yet the fundamental structure remained sound, a testament to the craftsmanship of a bygone era. They circled to the rear where a smaller service entrance was secured by a rusted padlock. Frank's keys worked as promised, though Jackson had to apply considerable force to turn the mechanism, frozen from years of disuse. Inside, the air was still and cold, but at least they were sheltered from the wind. Jackson produced a flashlight, its beam revealing a cavernous interior with old machinery still in place, covered in dust and cobwebs. The main production floor provided excellent visibility of all approaches through its many windows, while interior rooms offered potential concealment if needed. 3 hours until extraction, Elena noted, checking her watch. We should establish observation points, identify defensible positions in case of discovery. They set about securing their temporary fortress, Jackson taking the west-facing windows while Elena monitored the east. The briefcase remained always within arm's reach, its contents representing both immense danger and profound hope. As they settled into their vigil, Jackson found himself reflecting on the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this moment. Just 2 days ago, his concerns had been thoroughly ordinary farm finances, fence repairs, an argument with his son. Now he found himself at the center of a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of government, his actions potentially affecting countless lives beyond his own. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked suddenly, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. "Regret what?" Elena asked, not turning from her watch position. "Your career choice. Stepping into this world of secrets and shadows." Elena considered the question. "Sometimes. The cost is high normal relationships, peace of mind, the luxury of moral simplicity. But then I remember why I chose this path in the first place." "Which was?" "To protect people who will never know they were in danger. To stand between innocent lives and those who would sacrifice them for power or profit." She glanced at the briefcase. "What we're carrying could prevent a genocide. Whatever personal price I pay, it's worth that." Jackson nodded, understanding more deeply than he could express. Though their lives had followed vastly different paths, they shared a fundamental value, the willingness to place principles above personal comfort or safety. "When this is over," he said after a moment, "what happens? To you? To me?" "Officially, witness protection most likely. New identities, relocation. The people we're exposing have long memories and extensive resources." The implication settled heavily on Jackson's shoulders. "My farm. My son. Everything just gone?" Elena turned to face him fully, compassion evident in her expression. "I won't lie to you, Jackson. Your life as you knew it ended when you opened that helicopter door. But you saved my life, and potentially thousands of others." "Not much consolation for Michael," Jackson murmured. "First his mother dies, then his father vanishes." "There might be alternatives," Elena offered, "depending on how the situation resolves. People who help expose threats of this magnitude. The government can be creative in its gratitude." Before Jackson could respond, a sound outside caught their attention, the faint but unmistakable crunch of footsteps in snow. They immediately doused the flashlight, moving to defensive positions with practiced silence. Through the frosted windows, shapes became visible, 4 figures approaching from the north, moving with the disciplined precision of trained operatives. They wore white winter camouflage, their faces obscured by tactical masks. "Friendlies or hostiles?" Jackson whispered, hand moving to the revolver at his waist. Elena studied the approaching figures intently. "Wait, there." She pointed to a subtle hand signal one of the figures was making. "That's the extraction team's recognition signal." Relief washed over them, though Jackson maintained his caution. "They're early." "Adapted to the situation," Elena explained. "Standard protocol when the environment changes." They moved to the service entrance, Elena positioning herself to be visible while Jackson covered her from a concealed position. Trust, but verify. The unspoken wisdom of survival. The door opened, admitting 4 snow-covered operatives who entered with weapons ready, but not pointed directly at them. The leader removed his tactical mask, revealing a weathered face with alert eyes that immediately focused on Elena. "Dr. Chambers," he acknowledged with a nod. "Situation?" "Stable," she replied. "Assets secure. Hostiles in the area conducting search patterns." The man nodded again, all business. "Extraction window has narrowed. Hostile forces have established multi-layer perimeter. Our insertion was challenging but successful. Exfiltration must be immediate." Jackson watched this exchange with the sense of witnessing a foreign language, the clipped, efficient communication of professionals for whom such situations were routine. "This is Jackson Reeves," Elena introduced. "Without him, neither I nor the asset would have survived." The team leader assessed Jackson with a penetrating gaze. "Civilian involvement complicates matters." "He's coming with us," Elena stated firmly. "Non-negotiable." A tense moment passed before the leader nodded. "Your call." "But we move now." Helicopter is maintaining holding pattern outside radar coverage. "We have 20 minutes to reach the extraction point." Elena turned to Jackson. "Last chance to reconsider. Once you board that helicopter, your old life ends." Jackson thought of his farm, the land his family had worked for generations, now likely to be lost to bank foreclosure. He thought of Michael, their relationship strained but not broken, the possibility of reconciliation still alive. He thought of his simple, struggling existence, with its familiar challenges and modest rewards. Then he looked at the briefcase containing evidence of a weapon designed for mass murder, of corruption reaching to the highest levels of power. He thought of what Elena had said, to protect people who would never know they were in danger. "Let's go," he said simply. The extraction team moved with practiced efficiency, establishing a protective formation around Elena and the briefcase, with Jackson integrated into their security bubble. They exited the mill into a night transformed by the ongoing storm, visibility reduced to mere yards. Their progress was necessarily slow, the team navigating by GPS through terrain rendered unrecognizable by the heavy snowfall. They maintained radio silence, communicating through hand signals and predetermined protocols. 15 minutes into their journey, disaster struck. The lead operative froze, raising a closed fist that immediately halted the group. Ahead, barely visible through the swirling snow, vehicle lights approached, one of the search teams, their path intersecting directly with the extraction route. "Down," the team leader ordered quietly, the group immediately dropping to prone positions in the deep snow. The vehicles drew closer, their powerful spotlights sweeping across the landscape. Discovery seemed inevitable until nature intervened. A sudden intensification of the storm created a whiteout condition, a wall of snow between them and the approaching search team. "Move now," the leader commanded. Alternative route. They adjusted course, using the storm's fury as cover, pushing through snowdrifts that reached their knees. Jackson stayed close to Elena, noting how she clutched the briefcase with unwavering determination despite her exhaustion. The extraction point, a small clearing in the forest beyond Pinewood, appeared before them just as the storm began to slacken. As if on cue, the distinctive thump of helicopter rotors became audible, growing louder as their transportation approached. 20 seconds to touchdown, the team leader announced. Maintain security perimeter. The helicopter materialized through the diminishing snowfall, a sleek black shape with minimal running lights. It descended rapidly into the clearing, snow swirling in violent patterns beneath its rotors. As the team moved toward the waiting aircraft, a new sound cut through the night engines, approaching rapidly from the direction of town. The search teams had found their trail. Move! The leader shouted, abandoning stealth for speed. They sprinted the final distance to the helicopter, its side door already open, with another operative providing cover from within. Elena reached it first, passing the briefcase to waiting hands before turning back to ensure Jackson was with her. The vehicles were visible now, headlights cutting through the trees as they approached the clearing. Jackson and Elena reached the helicopter together, clambering aboard as the team provided covering fire to slow their pursuers. The aircraft immediately began to lift, still taking fire from below. "Everyone secure?" the pilot called over the intercom. The team leader performed a rapid head count. "All accounted for. Assets secure. Depart immediately." As the helicopter gained altitude, banking sharply to put distance between them and the ground threat, Jackson looked down at the scene below. The clearing was now filled with vehicles and personnel, their former pursuers rendered impotent by their successful extraction. The helicopter accelerated, leaving Pinewood and Jackson's old life behind. He turned from the window to find Elena watching him, understanding in her eyes. "Regrets?" she asked softly. Jackson considered the question, the weight of all he was leaving behind balanced against the purpose of their mission. "Some," he acknowledged honestly. "But not about the choice I made." Elena nodded, satisfied. "For what it's worth, what you've done matters. More than you can imagine." The briefcase now rested in a secure compartment, its journey nearly complete. Soon its contents would reach those with the authority and integrity to act on them, exposing corruption and preventing atrocities. "What happens now?" Jackson asked, the reality of his situation beginning to settle in. "Debriefing at a secure facility," Elena explained. "Then decisions about your future. Witness protection is one option, but not the only one." "What are the others?" Elena's expression softened slightly. "Someone with your skills, courage, and proven integrity. There are agencies that would value such qualities. If you were interested." The implication was clear, a potential new path, different from anything he had imagined for himself, yet somehow fitting given the transformation he had undergone in the past 48 hours. "And my son?" The question that weighed heaviest on his heart. "Complicated but not impossible," Elena replied. "These situations have precedent. Solutions exist that could allow contact under controlled circumstances. It wasn't perfect, but it offered hope, a bridge between his past life and whatever future awaited him." As the helicopter carried them through the night sky, away from danger and toward uncertainty, Jackson Reeves reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a simple choice: to open a crashed helicopter door despite the risk, to help a stranger in need despite the cost. That single decision had revealed character he hadn't known he possessed, courage he hadn't realized he was capable of, and purpose more profound than he had ever experienced on his struggling farm. In losing his ordinary life, he had discovered something extraordinary within himself, the capacity to make a difference on a scale he could scarcely comprehend. The evidence they carried would save countless lives, expose corruption that threatened the very foundations of democracy, and bring justice to those who had betrayed their oaths and responsibilities. And Jackson's simple farmer turned unlikely hero had been the linchpin upon which it all turned. As dawn broke on the horizon, painting the clouds in hues of gold and crimson, Jackson felt something unexpected amid the turmoil of recent events: peace. Whatever came next, he had stood for truth when it was difficult, chosen courage over comfort, and placed the greater good above personal interest. "Some battles chose you," rather than the other way around. And in facing this unexpected battle, Jackson Reeves had discovered who he truly was, a revelation worth any sacrifice. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.